Hercule Poirot and the Vanishing Gentleman Chat-Papal. 1. The Mysterious Disappearance. The clock struck precisely 8:30 in the evening, when the doors of the grand ballroom at Lord Pennington's estate opened to reveal an unexpected scene. The guests in their glittering evening gowns and sharp tuxedos were bustling with conversation, laughing, sipping champagne, and exchanging polite pleasantries, unaware that the night's festivities were about to be overshadowed by an enigma that none could have predicted. Lord Pennington, a man of considerable wealth and influence, had organised the annual charity ball at his sprawling manor. It was an event to which the crème de la crème of British society had been invited, an evening designed for networking, flattering speeches, and a symphony of fine dining. But as the final notes of the orchestra's overture faded away, an unexpected twist was about to send the night into disarray. The first whispers started as a small group of guests gathered near the edge of the ballroom, casting furtive glances at the far end of the room. There, just beneath a cluster of elaborate candelabras, stood an elegant man, impeccably dressed in a dark blue velvet suit, his eyes sharp and calculating. He was a foreigner, an unknown face among the regulars, and his presence had raised more than a few eyebrows since his arrival. The mystery began when the gentleman in question, who had introduced himself as Mr. Henry Lavoisier, was last seen in deep conversation with Lady Pennington by the fireplace. A few moments later, he was gone, vanished, without a trace. No one saw him leave, and no one could recall seeing him for the past hour. His disappearance was so utterly complete that no one noticed at first. Guests were too wrapped up in their own amusements, until someone remarked upon his absence, and the realization began to spread like wildfire. Surely such a distinguished guest could not have simply vanished into thin air. Was it some sort of dramatic self-inflicted exit to escape the tedium of social convention? The murmur of confusion quickly escalated into concern, as Lady Pennington, her face pale with worry, confirmed that she had not seen Mr. Lavoisier leave, nor had she seen him since their last exchange. Her husband, Lord Pennington, gave a gruff command to the butler, instructing him to check the estate thoroughly for any sign of the missing man. It was only when the butler's search revealed that Mr. Lavoisier's coat and hat were still hanging in the cloakroom, untouched and perfectly arranged, that the atmosphere shifted from curiosity to alarm. A private investigation was immediately launched by Lord Pennington himself. No one suspected that a crime had occurred, but the sudden disappearance of a guest, particularly one as mysterious as Mr. Lavoisier, could not be ignored. The man had no obvious enemies, and his conversations throughout the evening had been entirely social. Yet his absence, uncannily complete and unexplained, hinted at something far more disturbing. It was then that Hercule Poirot was called in, as if his presence alone could offer the missing piece to a puzzle that was quickly becoming more complex than anyone could imagine. His impeccable reputation for solving mysteries, often at the most delicate of occasions, had reached Lord Pennington's ears, and he was summoned without hesitation. Arriving at the estate in his usual precise manner, Poirot examined the scene with his characteristic air of concentration. His sharp, methodical gaze swept across the room, taking in the fine details, the position of the furniture, the slight tension between guests who had noticed the absence of their host's enigmatic visitor. He listened intently as the staff explained the situation, paying special attention to the inconsistencies in their statements. Each one had a different recollection of the last moment they saw Mr. Lavoisier, but Poirot detected in their eyes something more subtle. Fear. Fear of what? And why was no one speaking plainly about what they had seen? Poirot turned to the butler, a tall, stiff man with an air of aloofness. "You, my friend, seem unusually perturbed. I would appreciate it if you would tell me, honestly, if you noticed anything at all, out of the ordinary this evening." The butler stiffened, but complied, reluctantly admitting that he had seen Mr. Lavoisier just before the disappearance. However, he claimed not to have heard any strange noises or witnessed anything untoward. Poirot then made his way to Lady Pennington, who, despite her best efforts to maintain her composure, was clearly shaken. Her eyes darted nervously as Poirot addressed her. "Lady Pennington, if you would indulge me, I must know. What was it precisely that Mr. Lavoisier said to you before he left?" Lady Pennington paused, as if recollecting the exchange. "He spoke of a matter of great importance," she said, her voice quivering. "But he did not elaborate. I simply assumed he would return to our conversation, but he never did." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, his mind already racing through the possibilities. The disappearance of Mr. Lavoisier could be explained away in many ways, but Poirot's intuition told him that something far more complicated was afoot. With a polite bow, Poirot excused himself and took his leave of the ballroom. There was much to consider, and every detail, no matter how seemingly insignificant, needed to be scrutinized. He knew that every person at the estate had something to hide, even if they were unaware of the fact the game had begun, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until the truth was revealed. His little grey cells would uncover the mystery behind the vanishing gentleman, whether through hidden motives, psychological insights, or carefully deciphering the contradictions in the stories he had been told. Little did anyone know, but Poirot had already begun to piece together the first clues. The hidden tensions, the nervous glances, the lies disguised as truth, and soon the first piece of the puzzle would fall into place. Chapter 2. The First False Lead. The grand clock at the entrance hall of Lord Pennington's estate had struck 9 when Hercule Poirot returned to the ballroom, now humming with the hushed whispers of a growing sense of unease. His sharp, calculating eyes flickered over the guests who, for the most part, were trying to regain their composure after the unsettling disappearance of Mr. Lavoisier. No one spoke openly of the incident, but the air was thick with the unspoken acknowledgment that something was wrong. Poirot, ever the picture of composure, moved with a deliberate calmness, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floors. His presence was commanding, even when he said nothing. The guests who had previously been caught up in their own social dramas now watched him with varying degrees of curiosity and discomfort. They knew, instinctively, that Poirot had been summoned for a reason. He was no ordinary detective. It was not long before Poirot was approached by the butler once more. His expression was anxious, almost pleading. "Monsieur Poirot," the butler began, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "I fear we may have found something." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, a clue, perhaps," he said softly, his voice betraying no emotion, though his mind was already running through possibilities. The butler nodded, his face pale. "A note, monsieur, a letter. It was found inside Mr. Lavoisier's coat pocket just after his disappearance. It seemed out of place." Poirot's gaze sharpened as he followed the butler to the coat-room. The flickering light of the chandeliers seemed almost to hesitate in the darkness, casting long, distorted shadows across the space. There, neatly hung on a coat-rack, was the dark blue velvet jacket of the missing man. Poirot approached it without a word, his fingers brushing against the fabric with reverence. It was in perfect condition, undisturbed, as though it had not been worn for hours. The butler handed Poirot the letter, its edges crisp and precise, clearly folded by a steady hand. Poirot took it from him with the same delicate care, unfolding it slowly to reveal the neatly penned words. "There is no way out. The truth will find you. Beware of the man in the shadows." The handwriting was elegant, but the words were chilling, as if the writer knew something no one else did. Poirot read the message several times, his expression unwavering. The butler waited expectantly, but Poirot said nothing for a long moment. "This note, it tells us nothing and yet everything," Poirot mused aloud. "It is a message intended to confuse, to mislead. It could very well be an elaborate ploy to divert our attention. Mr. Lavoisier is not a fool, though perhaps his enemies are. They believe, as many do, that messages such as this will lead to clarity, but this only deepens the mystery." The butler, visibly unsettled, asked, "You think this note means nothing, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, my friend, it is not so much that it means nothing. It simply means too much, and that is precisely the problem. It is a puzzle within a puzzle. We must ask who benefits from such a message being found." The butler had no answer. Poirot, sensing his growing discomfort, gave him a reassuring smile. "You have done well. Now, leave me. I must reflect upon this." As the butler retreated, Poirot returned to the ballroom, holding the letter delicately in his hand. It was clear now that whoever had written this note intended to confuse and unsettle, to paint a portrait of doom and inevitability. But Poirot was not so easily swayed. He had a different idea. The letter was part of a larger scheme, a game that had only just begun, and Poirot intended to play it with every ounce of his mental acuity. He paused at the edge of the ballroom, watching the guests as they returned to their conversations, their laughter ringing a little too hollow, their glances a little too nervous. Lady Pennington was among them, her face a portrait of quiet concern, but she spoke with composure, as though she were desperately trying to hold on to the normalcy of the evening. Lord Pennington, too, was present, though his usual authoritative manner seemed to have softened somewhat in the face of this peculiar event. They had no answers, but they each seemed to have their own theories. Poirot's attention was drawn to a figure in the corner of the room, Mrs. Evelyn St. Clair, a striking woman of indeterminate age, who had been speaking with Mr. Lavoisier earlier in the evening. Mrs. St. Clair was one of the most well-known socialites in London, notorious for her sharp wit and her endless network of connections. She was, however, a woman with a reputation for secrecy, and Poirot had noted the way she had reacted when he inquired about Mr. Lavoisier's disappearance. His mind began to churn with possibilities. Mrs. St. Clair was a woman of many faces, but which one was the true one? Her involvement with Mr. Lavoisier could not be entirely coincidental, and the note had mentioned a man in the shadows, a phrase that seemed all too fitting when describing the enigmatic Mrs. St. Clair Poirot made his way over to her, his presence causing her to stiffen ever so slightly. She was talking to a tall, thin man, whose bored expression seemed at odds with the tension in the room. Poirot waited for a pause in their conversation before making his move. "Ah, Mrs. St. Clair," Poirot said, his voice soft and polite. "I hope you do not mind my interruption, but I must speak with you for a moment. You and Mr. Lavoisier appeared to be quite engaged earlier. I trust there was nothing untoward in your conversation." Mrs. St. Clair's smile was like ice, charming but cold. "Monsieur Poirot, you are always so direct. What a pleasure to meet someone who cuts through the nonsense," she replied, her tone pleasant but guarded. Poirot observed her closely, his mind working over every word, every gesture. "I ask, my lady, only because Mr. Lavoisier seemed troubled. Did he mention anything of importance? A conversation, perhaps, that might shed light on his sudden disappearance?" Mrs. St. Clair hesitated, and for a brief moment Poirot saw something flicker in her eyes, a flash of fear quickly masked. He mentioned a few trivial matters, nothing that would explain his sudden departure, I assure you. Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Nothing at all? Not even a mention of a certain man in the shadows?" he inquired softly, testing her reaction. Mrs. St. Clair's eyes widened ever so slightly, and she laughed, the sound strained. "Monsieur Poirot, you have quite the imagination. I do not know of any such person. You must be mistaken." Her denial was too quick, too practised. Poirot knew instantly that he had struck a nerve, but he said no more, simply offering her a polite smile. "I do not believe you, Mrs. St. Clair," he thought to himself, "but I will allow you to deceive me, just a little longer." As he stepped away, Poirot's mind was already piecing together the clues, the contradictions in her words, and the fear that lingered just beneath her perfectly composed exterior. Mrs. St. Clair was, without question, hiding something. The evening stretched on, but Poirot was no closer to unravelling the mystery of Mr. Lavoisier's disappearance, yet he was undeterred. In his experience, mysteries always had a way of revealing themselves when one was patient enough to wait for the right moment. As Poirot surveyed the room, watching the guests, he knew that the key to this puzzle was hidden somewhere, waiting for him to uncover it. But in the meantime, the first false lead had emerged. The letter, a note that seemed to point to something sinister, was a calculated move in a game that had only just begun. And as Poirot moved to examine the guests further, he felt certain that the real mystery, the true nature of Mr. Lavoisier's disappearance, was far more complicated than anyone had yet imagined. The vanishing gentleman was but the beginning. Chapter 3. The Psychological Game. It was the morning after the grand soirée at Lord Pennington's estate, and Hercule Poirot found himself back in the library, the room still heavy with the echoes of the previous night's events. The sun streamed through the large windows, casting long rays of light across the floor. A thick layer of dust hung in the air, undisturbed, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Poirot sat at a large wooden desk, a single sheet of paper before him. His fingers rested lightly on the surface, but his mind was elsewhere, working at the puzzle with his customary precision. The disappearance of Mr. Lavoisier was no simple matter. The note found in his jacket, with its ominous words, had shaken up the investigation in ways that Poirot knew would lead to dangerous ground. It was clear now that the case had taken on a new, more intricate dimension. There was no longer any question of a mere disappearance. It was a carefully crafted mystery, a game of shadows and lies that Poirot was determined to solve. He had spent hours last night retracing every conversation, every glance, and every movement of the guests. He had questioned the butler, Lady Pennington, Lord Pennington, and others, but had learned little that he did not already know. Everyone had their own theories, but none of them seemed to match the facts. The only certainty Poirot had was that the disappearance of Lavoisier was deliberate and planned, not some random accident. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Come in!" he called without looking up, his voice steady, his focus still firmly on the paper in front of him. The door opened to reveal Captain Hastings, Poirot's trusted friend and chronicler, his face drawn in concern. Hastings stepped inside, his military posture as rigid as ever, though his eyes reflected the confusion that had settled in since Lavoisier's disappearance. "Poirot, I hope I'm not disturbing you," Hastings began, his tone betraying his usual directness. "I've been thinking about the case all morning, and I believe I have something that might be of interest." Poirot's eyes flicked up from his notes, his keen gaze immediately zeroing in on Hastings. "Ah, my friend, I did wonder when you would return. You have been thinking, yes? Tell me what has crossed your mind." Hastings took a seat, settling in front of Poirot's desk. He leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "I went over the events of the evening in my head again. There is one thing that's been bothering me. You know, Mrs. St. Clair, she's not as innocent as she seems." Poirot's lips twitched into a smile. "Ah, you are learning, mon ami. Tell me more." "What bothers you about Mrs. St. Clair?" Hastings seemed to gather his thoughts, then spoke carefully. "Well, it's her behaviour, Poirot. You noticed how she reacted when you mentioned the man in the shadows? She wasn't just surprised, she was genuinely startled, almost as though she had expected someone to say those very words." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Aha, and what else?" Hastings continued. "And then there's the matter of her movements the night of the party. She was in and out of the study several times, though she said she was simply enjoying the view from the balcony. But each time it seemed like she was looking for something, or someone." Poirot leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "You have a good point, mon ami. Mrs. St. Clair's actions are curious. I, too, have my suspicions about her, but I believe there is more to this than meets the eye." Hastings stared at him in confusion. "You think she's involved in Lavoisier's disappearance?" Poirot gave a small shake of his head. "No, not yet, but she is playing a role in this game. Of that I am certain. Whether she is aware of it or not, she is being used as a pawn in someone else's scheme." Hastings looked doubtful. "But who would want to involve her in something like this?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "That, mon ami, is the crux of the matter. The key to solving this lies not in the crime itself, but in understanding the motivations behind it. Every person involved has something to hide. But what are they hiding? That is the question. There was a long pause as Hastings took in the weight of Poirot's words. It was then that Poirot's eyes gleamed with the cold fire of insight. "Come, Hastings, we have more work to do. The day is young, and there are still many paths to explore. We must turn our attention to the others." They stood together, Poirot leading the way out of the library. Poirot had made up his mind. He would not rush to conclusions. He would watch, observe, and learn. Everyone in the house was a potential suspect, and no one was above scrutiny. But Poirot's gift for deduction was his strength. He did not need physical evidence. He only needed people to reveal their true selves through their words, their gestures, their silences. Later that afternoon, Poirot and Hastings found themselves seated in the drawing-room, an elegant space filled with deep armchairs and intricate tapestries. Lady Pennington had graciously invited them to meet with her to discuss the disappearance of Lavoisier. She appeared as calm as ever, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her unease. "Gentlemen," she began, her smile polite but strained, "I do hope you are making progress in your investigation. This entire ordeal has been a nightmare, and I simply can't understand why anyone would want to harm a man like Mr. Lavoisier." Poirot studied her intently. "Ah, madame, I too find it puzzling. Mr. Lavoisier was a man with many connections, many admirers, and many enemies. But what I find most curious is not his disappearance, but rather the message that was left behind." Lady Pennington's eyes widened slightly. "What message?" Poirot reached into his coat pocket and produced the letter. "This, madam. It was found inside Mr. Lavoisier's jacket. It is most cryptic. Do you recognize the handwriting?" Lady Pennington took the letter with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the words quickly. Her expression remained unchanged, but Poirot could see her eyes flicker with something akin to recognition, though she quickly masked it. "No, I can't say I do," she replied, her voice steady. "It seems to me like the kind of note one would leave to confuse the police, to make things more difficult." Poirot nodded. "Exactly. A note meant to mislead. But why? And why was it left in Mr. Lavoisier's jacket?" Lady Pennington glanced down at the letter again, her lips tightening. Perhaps it was meant to send a message. Or perhaps someone was trying to frighten us all. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You think someone is trying to frighten us, madam? Or do you think someone is trying to frighten you, specifically?" There was a long pause, and Poirot could see the sudden tension in Lady Pennington's posture. She stiffened slightly, though she immediately composed herself. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice losing its earlier firmness. "I simply want to understand what happened to Mr. Lavoisier." Poirot allowed the silence to stretch on for a moment before responding. "Indeed, madam. But you see, when people are hiding something, they often betray themselves in the smallest of ways. A gesture, a glance, an involuntary shift in posture. It is these things that I pay attention to." Lady Pennington shifted in her seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I assure you, Monsieur Poirot, I have nothing to hide." Poirot stood, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than was comfortable. "We shall see, madame, we shall see." Later that evening, Poirot's mind was still racing as he sat in his room, pondering the events of the day. The psychological game was well and truly underway. Lady Pennington was hiding something. There was no doubt in Poirot's mind about that. But what was it? And how did it tie into the disappearance of Mr. Lavoisier? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Enter!" he called, his mind still caught in the web of the case. The door opened, and the butler appeared, his face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, there is someone who wishes to speak with you." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Who, may I ask?" "It is Mrs. Sinclair, sir," the butler replied, his voice low. "She insists it is urgent." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings, who was sitting by the window. "Very well, let her in," he said, his voice calm but filled with a quiet intensity. As Mrs. Sinclair entered the room, she seemed more composed than usual, though the faintest trace of worry still lingered behind her eyes. "Ah, madame, what brings you here at this late hour?" Poirot asked, his tone polite but probing. Mrs. Sinclair's gaze flickered nervously, but she took a deep breath before speaking. "Monsieur Poirot, I must confess, I have been hiding something from you." Poirot sat back, his mind immediately alert. The game was about to take a new turn. Chapter 4. The Hidden Clue. The fire crackled in the hearth of Poirot's private study, the warmth from the flames a stark contrast to the cold chill that had settled in the Pennington estate. The house felt as though it was holding its breath, its halls laden with the weight of uncertainty. In the drawing-room, Hastings sat with a glass of sherry, his thoughts clouded by the strange developments of the day. Poirot, on the other hand, was as focused as ever, his mind whirring with deductions, theories, and connections. He had learned much, but there was still so much left to uncover. The day had been a turning point in the investigation. Mrs. Sinclair's unexpected visit to Poirot's room, with her admission of having concealed something, had added a new layer to the puzzle. Her confession, though vague, hinted at deeper motives and shadows lurking within the walls of the house. The fact that she had come to Poirot was, in itself, telling. It spoke of fear, of guilt, perhaps even of desperation. Poirot had listened carefully to her, noting every word, every hesitation. But it was clear that she was still holding something back. Her statement had been more of a plea than a confession, and it was one that Poirot could not yet fully decode. "She's hiding something," Poirot had murmured softly to Hastings after Mrs. Sinclair's departure. "But she is not yet ready to reveal it." "But what does she know?" Hastings had asked, his brow furrowing. Could she be involved with Lavoisier's disappearance? Poirot had leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers together in thought. "Perhaps, mon ami, but I believe she is not the true source of the mystery. She is, however, part of it, a piece of the puzzle. Someone is using her, manipulating her. It is all part of a game, and she does not even realize she is playing." Now, as Poirot sat at his desk, the thoughts swirling in his mind, he reviewed the facts once again. He was methodical in his approach, dissecting each piece of the case like a surgeon examining a wound. The disappearance of Lavoisier, the cryptic note, the strange behavior of the suspects. It all pointed to something far deeper than a mere vanishing act. The other guests at Lord Pennington's estate were no less enigmatic. Lady Pennington, with her composed exterior, hid something behind her carefully maintained facade. The butler, Mr. Barlow, who had been so quick to speak of Lavoisier's eccentricities, seemed far more knowledgeable than he let on. And then there was Lord Pennington himself, a man whose apparent indifference to the situation was beginning to take on a more sinister tone. But it was Mrs. St. Clair's visit that had truly struck Poirot. Her nervousness, the way her hands fidgeted, the way her eyes avoided direct contact. It was all part of a larger picture, one that Poirot could not yet fully grasp. He would need to keep her close, observe her movements, and most importantly, watch for any signs of weakness that might betray her. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, marking the passage of time. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly against his desk, his eyes scanning the papers scattered before him. He was missing something, a single clue, perhaps, that would turn everything in the right direction. His mind flashed back to the letter that had been found in Lavoisier's jacket. He had studied it thoroughly, but there was one thing that still gnawed at him: the handwriting. It had seemed oddly familiar, as if he had seen it before. Poirot's lips pursed in concentration as he tried to place it, and then, as if a light had been switched on in his mind, he saw it. The handwriting was the same as the one in Lady Pennington's private letters. It was subtle, a mere shift in the strokes of the pen, but it was there, the slight curve of the letters, the distinctive loop in the E, the way the T crossed in an almost perfumed manner. It was unmistakable. Poirot's heart quickened as he considered the implications. Had Lady Pennington been involved in Lavoisier's disappearance? Was she trying to frame someone else, or had she simply been caught up in a web of lies and deceit? He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor as he paced across the room. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. He needed more information. He needed to know what was really happening in that house, beneath the surface of polite conversation and forced smiles. Poirot turned to Hastings, who had been observing him quietly. "Hastings, my friend, we have work to do. The game is afoot, but it is not yet over. We must gather our suspects one by one and watch their every move. The truth lies within their actions, not their words." Hastings nodded. "You think Lady Pennington's involved?" Poirot nodded slowly. "It is not certain, but the evidence is compelling. We must test our theory, but I do not believe she is the mastermind. She is simply a player in a much larger game." The two men made their way back to the drawing-room, where the remaining guests were assembled, waiting to speak with Poirot. The tension in the room was palpable, each individual aware of the gravity of the situation, yet unsure of what to expect. As they entered the room, Poirot's eyes scanned the group. Lord Pennington stood near the fireplace, his posture stiff and guarded. Mrs. St. Clair was seated by the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the view outside. The butler, Mr. Barlow, hovered near the door, watching the proceedings with an air of professional detachment. Poirot cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the group. "Ladies and gentlemen, I trust you are all well. We are at a critical juncture in our investigation, and I must ask that you cooperate fully as we continue to unravel this mystery." There was a murmur of agreement, though each person looked on with varying degrees of suspicion and unease. Poirot continued, his tone calm yet firm. As you know, Mr. Lavoisier is missing, and though some of you may have your own theories, I assure you that we will uncover the truth soon enough. But before we proceed, I must ask each of you to be completely honest with me. No more lies, no more games. You are all connected to this crime in one way or another, and it is only a matter of time before the truth is revealed. Lady Pennington's eyes flicked nervously towards Poirot, but she quickly regained her composure. Monsieur Poirot, I assure you that we have nothing to hide. Poirot smiled gently, though his eyes were sharp with suspicion. That may be so, madame, but as you know, appearances can be deceiving. He turned to the butler. Mr. Barlow, you were one of the first to report Lavoisier's disappearance. Tell me, was there anything unusual in his behaviour prior to that night? The butler's expression was unreadable, but his voice was steady. Mr. Lavoisier was a man of peculiar habits. He spent much of his time in solitude, writing in his study or walking about the grounds. I never saw him exhibit anything out of the ordinary, though, I will admit, there was one instance when I noticed him speaking to Mrs. St. Clair in a manner that seemed rather intense. Poirot's interest piqued. And what did you observe exactly? Mr. Barlow hesitated before responding. It was brief, monsieur, but they were speaking in hushed tones, and Mrs. St. Clair seemed quite agitated. I'm not sure what they were discussing, but it appeared important. Poirot nodded slowly, his mind racing. And did you notice anything else? Any small details that might have been overlooked? Barlow's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment, before he looked up again. There was one thing. After their conversation, Mrs. St. Clair seemed changed. She was quieter than usual, and I saw her look at the study door as though she were contemplating something. Poirot's mind clicked into gear. Mrs. St. Clair had been acting oddly. Perhaps she knew more than she had let on. He turned to Lady Pennington. And you, madam? What can you tell me about Mr. Lavoisier's relationships with the others? Was there any friction between him and anyone here? Lady Pennington hesitated, as though weighing her words carefully. Lavoisier was well liked by most people here, but there were a few individuals with whom he did not get along, particularly Mr. St. Clair. They had several heated discussions over the years, though it never escalated to anything violent. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And what about your own interactions with Mr. Lavoisier? Were you close with him? Lady Pennington stiffened, though she quickly masked her discomfort with a polite smile. Mr. Lavoisier and I were acquaintances, nothing more. I have no reason to suspect anyone. Here, Poirot studied her closely, sensing there was something more behind her words, but for now, he allowed the matter to rest. As the investigation progressed, Poirot's thoughts turned once more to the hidden clue. The handwriting. He was certain it was Lady Pennington's. But the question remained, why had she left it in Lavoisier's jacket? What was she trying to communicate, and to whom? The answers would come in time. Poirot was sure of it. But the game was far from over, and the real mastermind behind Lavoisier's disappearance was still out there, lurking in the shadows. Chapter 5. A Web of Deceit. The morning sun had barely broken through the heavy mist that clung to the grounds of Pennington Estate. The estate's vast garden, though meticulously maintained, was now shrouded in an eerie quietude, the kind of stillness that only appeared when something unspeakable lingered in the air. As Poirot surveyed the estate from his window, his sharp eyes caught the faintest flicker of movement in the distance. Perhaps one of the guests or the butler, or even the ever-watchful Lady Pennington herself. Poirot stood in front of the window, his mind still swirling with the events of the previous night. The game had grown more complex, the pieces more elusive, but one thing was clear. The missing gentleman, Monsieur Lavoisier, was at the heart of a deep and tangled conspiracy. And the truth, though just within reach, remained stubbornly concealed. Hastings, who had been sitting at the small writing desk nearby, looked up and caught the thoughtful expression on Poirot's face. "What's troubling you, Poirot?" Poirot turned, his moustache twitching with a small, knowing smile. "Mon ami, the question is not what troubles me, but what lies beneath the surface of these people. There are secrets here, secrets that are carefully guarded, each one contributing to the mystery we now find ourselves in." Hastings frowned. "I know you've been working on this case for days now, but we're no closer to an answer. Every time we think we're getting somewhere, another twist appears." Poirot nodded, his gaze moving to the portrait of Lord Pennington hanging on the wall. "That is because the answer is not in the obvious, Hastings. The truth is in the details. It is in the way people act, the things they choose to conceal, the small moments that reveal more than they intend." Just as Poirot finished speaking, there was a soft knock on the door, and before either of them could respond, the door swung open to reveal Mrs. St. Clair standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she clutched a letter to her chest. "Mon Dieu!" Poirot muttered under his breath. "It seems we are about to receive yet another piece of this puzzling case." Mrs. St. Clair stepped into the room, her eyes darting nervously between Poirot and Hastings. "Monsieur Poirot, She faltered, her voice thick with emotion. "I need your help. There's something you must know, something I couldn't tell you before." Poirot gestured for her to sit. "Please, madam, take a seat. You need not be anxious. Whatever it is, we will face it together." Mrs. St. Clair sank into the chair, her posture rigid with tension. She handed the letter to Poirot, her fingers brushing his briefly as he took it. Poirot unfolded the letter carefully, his eyes scanning the contents. "It's from Lavoisier," Poirot said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "I had wondered if there would be more to this than we had first imagined." Mrs. St. Clair nodded, her voice barely audible as she spoke. I didn't want to tell you. I didn't know who to trust, but now I can't keep silent any longer." Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the letter. The words were written in a hurried, almost frantic script, the ink smeared in several places as if the writer had been in a hurry. The message was cryptic but clear enough to convey urgency. "The truth lies hidden in the shadows of the past. The gentleman who walked in the light is now lost in darkness. Beware the eyes that watch. From behind the curtains, trust no one. Your life and the lives of others are at stake. You know where to find me. Hurry, before it is too late." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he read the last line again. So, Monsieur Lavoisier was not simply vanishing of his own volition. He was running from someone or something. And now, it seems, He wants to make sure that whoever is behind his disappearance does not succeed in silencing him. Mrs. St. Clair looked up at Poirot, her expression a mixture of fear and confusion. What does it mean? Who is he warning us about? Poirot stood silently for a moment, his mind piecing together the fragments of information they had accumulated so far. There are those among us who have more to hide than they realize, madame. And I fear that Lavoisier's disappearance is only the beginning of a much darker plot. Hastings, who had been watching the exchange with a growing sense of unease, spoke up. But who would want to harm Lavoisier? And why? Poirot turned to his old friend, his gaze sharp and penetrating. That, Hastings, is precisely the question we must answer. But I believe we may be closer to the truth than we think. The key lies within the web of deceit surrounding Lavoisier's relationships with the other guests, and more specifically, his connection to Lady Pennington. Mrs. St. Clair's eyes widened in shock. Lady Pennington? But why? Poirot held up a hand, signalling for her to remain silent. I have been studying the letters that were found with Monsieur Lavoisier, and I believe they hold the answer. You see, the handwriting is unmistakably similar to that of Lady Pennington. The same distinctive loops, the same style of writing. But it is not just the handwriting that concerns me. It is the content of the letters themselves. Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. What do the letters say? Poirot hesitated, his eyes lingering on the contents of the letter he had just read. The letters speak of a shared secret, one that goes back many years. Lavoisier was involved in something or someone that he should not have been. And Lady Pennington's connection to him runs deeper than just a passing acquaintance. Mrs. St. Clair gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You're saying you think she's involved in his disappearance? Poirot's eyes remained steady. Not involved, madame, but connected. There is a difference. I do not believe Lady Pennington is the mastermind behind this mystery. But she knows more than she has let on. It is possible she has been threatened, perhaps even blackmailed, but I cannot be sure until I confront her directly. The tension in the room thickened, the silence hanging heavily between them. Poirot's words had stirred something deep within Mrs. St. Clair, something that had been bubbling beneath the surface all along. But it was not only Mrs. St. Clair who was on edge. Hastings could feel it too. The truth was out there, just within reach, and Poirot was determined to uncover it. I'll speak with her, Poirot finally said, his tone resolute. I'll ask the questions that need to be asked. But I need your help, Hastings. We must be cautious. The answers we seek are not easily found. But I will get to the heart of this mystery, and I will not stop until I have uncovered the truth. The three of them stood in silence for a moment, each of them aware that they were now standing on the precipice of something far darker than they had anticipated. The Pennington estate, with its grand halls and polished floors, was more than just a backdrop for a missing person case. It was the epicenter of a conspiracy, a web of lies, betrayals, and long-hidden secrets. Poirot turned to Mrs. St. Clair. Madame, I ask that you stay here. Do not leave this room until I return. You are safe for now, but we do not know who among us is watching, waiting. With that, Poirot and Hastings left the study, making their way through the grand hallway toward the drawing-room. Lady Pennington was waiting there, sitting gracefully in a plush armchair, her hands folded delicately in her lap. She greeted them with a cool smile, her eyes betraying none of the anxiety that had overtaken her in recent days. Poirot did not waste time with pleasantries. "Madame Pennington, I have come to speak with you about Monsieur Lavoisier." Her eyes narrowed slightly, though her expression remained composed. "I trust you found some clue as to his whereabouts, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's gaze was unwavering. "Perhaps, but I must ask you directly, what is your connection to Lavoisier? What were you two involved in?" Lady Pennington's eyes flicked toward the door, as though considering an escape route. For a fleeting moment, Poirot saw something in her gaze. A chill flash of fear, quickly masked by the facade of aristocratic poise. "But it was enough. I have nothing to hide, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "Lavoisier was a friend, nothing more. I have no idea why he would disappear." Poirot studied her intently, his mind working at full capacity. "We shall see, madam. We shall see." Chapter 6. The Key to the Puzzle. The rain had started to fall heavily, a thick curtain of droplets blotting out the faint sunlight that had earlier bathed the Pennington estate in a soft glow. The weather, as it often does, seemed to mirror the mounting tension in the house. Each drop of rain that pattered against the windows felt like a tick of the clock, counting down to some inevitable moment when the truth would finally be revealed. Or, as Poirot feared, another trap would be set. As Poirot sat in the drawing-room, carefully turning over the contents of the letters Lavoisier had left behind, he couldn't help but wonder how the pieces of the puzzle could be fit together. They were so close now. He could sense it, feel it in the air. But something still eluded him. One more step, one more conversation, and then it would all come into focus. Hastings had left earlier to speak with some of the household staff, hoping to uncover anything further about Lavoisier's final days. Poirot knew that his friend's inquiries, while useful, would not yield the key to this enigma. It would take something more, something only Poirot's little grey cells could uncover. Lady Pennington's reaction earlier had been telling. Her carefully crafted mask of aristocratic poise had cracked for just a moment, and Poirot had seen a glimpse of the fear she had tried so hard to suppress. Yet Poirot was no fool. He knew that fear, too, could be manipulated. People often underestimated how far they were willing to go to hide their darkest secrets. And Lady Pennington, he suspected, was no different from the rest. She may have been playing a dangerous game, but she was not above the law. Poirot's mind kept drifting back to the cryptic message in Lavoisier's letter. The gentleman who walked in the light was now lost in darkness. The statement, so simple yet profound, could mean a number of things, but what exactly had Lavoisier meant by it? Who or what had he been running from? And why had he chosen to vanish at the exact moment when his absence would cause such a ripple within the Pennington family? Poirot let out a soft sigh, rising from his chair and walking over to the window, his sharp eyes watching the rain as it blurred the landscape. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft click of the door opening behind him. He turned to find Hastings standing there, a concerned look on his face. "Poirot," Hastings began, "I've been speaking with the staff, as you suggested. I've learned a few things, though I'm not sure how useful they are." Poirot's expression remained neutral, though his mind was already processing the new information. "Tell me, Hastings, every detail matters." "Well, I spoke with the butler, Mr. Gray, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Thompson. They both claim to have seen Lavoisier late in the evening, just before his disappearance, though neither of them recalls him being particularly upset. In fact, Mrs. Thompson mentioned that Lavoisier seemed unusually calm, even though he had been quite agitated earlier in the day." Poirot's interest piqued. "Unusually calm, you say?" Hastings nodded. "Yes. She said that he appeared to have something on his mind, but he was careful to avoid drawing attention to it. Apparently, he spent some time in the library, looking over some papers, though no one seems to know exactly what he was doing." Poirot's lips twitched as he considered this new piece of information. "And did they mention anything about Lady Pennington? Was she involved in his movements that night?" Hastings hesitated. "Well, they both say they didn't see her much after dinner. Apparently, she was spending time in her private study, as she often does, but neither Gray nor Thompson could confirm that she and Lavoisier spoke to each other directly." Poirot mulled over this for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the desk. "Fascinating. It seems that Lavoisier's disappearance was planned, but not in the way we might have expected. He was not in a panic. He did not flee in haste. No, mon ami. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he wanted to make sure he left no trace." Hastings frowned. "But why disappear like that? Why not just leave a message, a clue for someone to find?" Poirot turned to face his friend, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that only his closest companions could understand. "Because, Hastings, the answer lies not in what Lavoisier left behind, but in what he did not leave. He wanted to disappear completely, vanish from the world without leaving a single shred of evidence that could lead to him." Poirot's voice softened, almost as if he were speaking to himself. Lavoisier wanted to make sure that those who pursued him would be led in the wrong direction. That is why the letter he sent was so cryptic. He knew that we would find it, but he also knew that it would be a test, one that would challenge our assumptions and force us to look deeper. Hastings blinked. "So, you believe that Lavoisier set this entire thing up? That he wanted to be found, but only by those who could truly understand what had happened?" "Exactly," Poirot said, his face illuminated by the understanding that had only now become clear. "Lavoisier had no intention of disappearing permanently. He wanted to be found, but on his terms. That is why he left the message in the first place. It was a riddle, Hastings, a puzzle for us to solve, and we are not alone in solving it. Others are playing the same game." Hastings' face furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Poirot smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "There are others, mon ami, who are watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. They are pulling the strings from the shadows, and they know far more than they are letting on." Hastings stood in stunned silence, trying to piece together the complexity of Poirot's thoughts. "You mean to say that there's someone else behind all of this? Someone who's been orchestrating Lavoisier's disappearance?" Poirot nodded, his expression serious. "Yes, and I believe that we have already crossed paths with them, but until now we have not been paying attention. Lady Pennington, for example, she is not the mastermind, but she knows more than she is admitting. She has information that she has carefully concealed, and I suspect it is linked to the disappearance of her husband." The room fell silent as the weight of Poirot's words hung in the air. Hastings could feel the atmosphere growing, heavier, the mystery closing in around them like a tightening noose. For a brief moment, the rain's steady patter seemed to echo the rhythm of Poirot's thoughts, every drop a beat in the unfolding drama. Poirot turned his attention back to the letters Lavoisier had written. "We need to speak to Lady Pennington, again, Hastings, but this time we will approach her with more delicacy. We must get her to reveal what she knows without her realizing that she is doing so." Hastings nodded, though he was still processing the enormity of Poirot's deduction. "I don't understand, Poirot. Why would she help Lavoisier vanish in the first place?" Poirot's gaze was sharp as he answered, his mind already working out the next steps. "Because, mon ami, Lady Pennington's secret is tied to Lavoisier's. They are connected by something far darker than we have imagined, and that, I suspect, is the key to solving this case." As Poirot and Hastings prepared to confront Lady Pennington, the storm outside continued to rage, as though nature itself was echoing the turmoil inside the house. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but Poirot knew that the final reveal would come at a price. Every truth uncovered would expose deeper layers of deception, and the consequences of that truth would not be easily borne. With a final glance at the rain-soaked landscape outside, Poirot took a deep breath. The game was about to reach its climax, and nothing, no matter how carefully orchestrated, could stop him from uncovering the hidden truth. And he would not rest until the mystery of the vanishing gentleman was laid bare. Chapter 7. The Secrets of Lady Pennington. The following day brought with it a brief respite from the rain, though the sky remained overcast, shrouding the Pennington estate in a dreary mist. The tension in the household had only heightened after Poirot's revelations the previous evening, and as the morning unfolded, the air seemed thick with anticipation. The questions that hung over Lady Pennington's involvement in her husband's disappearance remained unresolved, and Poirot, with his trademark precision, knew that the next step in the investigation was crucial. Hastings, ever the loyal companion, sat across from Poirot in the drawing-room, his brow furrowed in thought. "So, Poirot, what exactly do we do now? You're convinced that Lady Pennington knows something more. But what if we're wrong? What if this is all just a wild theory?" Poirot smiled, the small knowing smile that meant he had already accounted for such doubts. "Hastings, mon ami, you underestimate me. It is not a theory I pursue, it is the truth I seek. And the truth, my dear friend, is always present even if it hides behind layers of pretense. Lady Pennington, as I have told you before, is a woman of great complexity. She has been playing her own game for far too long, and now she finds herself in deeper waters than she expected." Hastings leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. "You think she's lying? That she's hiding something?" Poirot nodded, his gaze steady. "It is not a matter of her lying outright, Hastings. It is that she is concealing the truth of what happened between her and Lavoisier, the truth of why he disappeared, and most importantly, the truth of what she stands to lose if that truth is revealed." Hastings sat back, his expression one of mild disbelief. But she's the victim here, isn't she? Her husband is gone, presumed dead, and now her reputation is at stake. How can you say she's concealing something?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, slightly, the smallest of glimmers flashing in their depths. "That is precisely what makes her so dangerous, Hastings. Her grief, her vulnerability. These are the tools she is using to manipulate those around her. But I do not trust grief. Grief can be staged, just as any other emotion can be." The room was silent for a moment, both men contemplating the layers of deceit that might be at play. Poirot stood and paced a few steps, his mind clearly working, through the next phase of the investigation. Lady Pennington is no fool. She knows the game is up, and yet she still has much to lose. This is why she will resist our attempts to dig deeper. She will deflect, mislead, and deny. But we, Hastings, will persist. We will find the truth. It was late afternoon before Poirot and Hastings made their way to Lady Pennington's private study. The rest of the household had retreated for the evening, leaving the two detectives with the perfect opportunity to speak to her without interruption. Poirot had already determined that their approach would be subtle but firm. Lady Pennington needed to feel as though she were in control of the conversation, even while Poirot steered it towards the revelation of her secrets. The study was an imposing room lined with dark mahogany bookshelves, the scent of aged leather and polished wood filling the air. A large, ornate desk sat in the centre, papers and correspondence neatly arranged, though an undercurrent of tension permeated the space. Lady Pennington sat behind the desk, her posture regal, her eyes carefully calculating as she rose to greet the visitors. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice as calm and composed as ever, though Poirot noticed the faintest tremor in her hands as she adjusted a vase on the desk. "What brings you to my study at this late hour?" Poirot, ever the picture of elegance, gave a polite bow, his eyes twinkling with intelligence. "Madame, we are here because there is still much we do not understand about the events surrounding your husband's disappearance. We must ask you to be patient with us as we continue our investigation." Lady Pennington's smile faltered for just a moment, but it quickly returned, more practised than before. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot, I understand. But I have already told you everything I know. My husband, he vanished without a trace, and no one can explain why." Poirot's gaze never wavered from her face as he approached the desk. "Yes, madam, you have been most forthcoming with your statements. But there are certain things that do not quite fit, and I find myself wondering, did your husband ever speak of anything that might explain his actions?" Lady Pennington's eyes shifted momentarily, betraying just the smallest hint of discomfort. She remained silent for a moment too long before replying, "My husband was a man of mystery, Monsieur Poirot. I cannot speak for his every thought, nor can I understand his every action." Poirot's tone softened, though his words were carefully measured. "Madame, I am sure you do not wish to appear unhelpful, but I must tell you that we are at an impasse. There are contradictions in your story, in what you have told us, and these contradictions make it difficult for us to proceed. And so, I must ask you again, did your husband ever give you any reason to believe that he might want to disappear?" At this, Lady Pennington's face hardened, the facade of composure slipping for just a moment. Her lips pressed together, and Poirot caught the faintest quiver in her jaw. It was enough to make him press further. "I do not understand what you mean," she said, her voice tight with restraint. "My husband was a gentleman. He had no reason to disappear." Poirot stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Madam, I believe you know more than you are letting on, and I believe that the key to understanding your husband's disappearance lies in something you have not yet revealed." Lady Pennington's eyes narrowed, but Poirot could see that her guard was beginning to crumble. She had anticipated many questions, but she had not anticipated being cornered so directly. It was the pressure of her own secrets that began to overwhelm her. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "What do you want from me, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's expression softened, though his eyes remained sharp. "I want you to tell me the truth, madame, the truth about your husband, about your relationship with him, and about the events of that night. Only then can we hope to bring clarity to this situation." Lady Pennington's gaze flickered, and for a moment she seemed to be lost in thought. Then, with a deep breath, she sat back in her chair and looked at Poirot. Her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and resignation. "Very well," she said, her voice barely audible. "I will tell you what I know. But you must understand. Some things are better left buried." Poirot nodded solemnly, his expression unreadable. "I understand, madam. But sometimes it is only by facing the truth that we can find peace." Lady Pennington closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts, before she began her confession. "My husband," she began, "was not the man he seemed to be. He was brilliant, yes, but there was something about him that was restless. He had a secret, something he never told me, though I suspected as much. He had been involved in something far darker than I ever knew." Poirot's eyes remained fixed on her, his mind already racing to connect the dots. "I only discovered the full extent of it after he started acting strangely, becoming more distant, more anxious. He told me that he was in danger, that there were people after him. At first I thought it was just paranoia, but I soon realized that there was more to his fears than I had understood." Lady Pennington paused, her eyes haunted by the memories. "He said that he had been involved in a conspiracy, one that reached further than even he had anticipated. There were threats, letters, people who came to the house in the dead of night. He tried to protect me from it all, but I could see the fear in his eyes." Poirot leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What kind of conspiracy, madam? Who was behind it?" Lady Pennington's face tightened, and she glanced down at her hands. "I do not know the full extent, Monsieur Poirot, but I know this. Lavoisier was not just an inventor. He was involved in something that could ruin lives, and he was determined to protect me, even if it meant disappearing." Poirot's mind whirled. It was clear now that Lavoisier's disappearance was far more than a simple case of running away. It was an escape from something far greater than anyone had imagined. As Lady Pennington finished her account, Poirot remained silent, absorbing the weight of her words. He had learned much, but there was still more to uncover. This conspiracy she spoke of, the people after Lavoisier, this was the key to understanding his disappearance. But what had truly happened that night? And who, beyond Lady Pennington, was involved in this web of deception? Poirot knew that the next steps would be crucial, and time was running out. The truth was out there, hidden beneath layers of secrecy, and it was only a matter of time before he uncovered it. Chapter 8. The Silent Witness. The air was thick with uncertainty. The investigation, which had once seemed so straightforward, now seemed to spin on the edge of a precipice. Hercule Poirot sat in the study of Pennington House, the dim light casting shadows that stretched across the polished wooden floors. Hastings, ever loyal, sat opposite him, quietly watching as Poirot's mind worked through the latest revelations. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, and yet they seemed to be falling into place with alarming speed. Since Lady Pennington's confession, the investigation had taken a drastic turn. The conspiracy that Lavoisier had been involved in, whatever it was, remained shrouded in mystery. The man had been a brilliant inventor, yes, but it appeared that his genius had drawn him into a dark web of secrets, threats, and danger. And now that web had ensnared Lady Pennington, who had become an unwilling participant in the tragic game that had led to her husband's disappearance. Poirot's mind raced as he recalled the details Lady Pennington had divulged. It was clear that Lavoisier had not simply vanished into thin air. He had made a choice, a choice to leave behind his wife, his life, and perhaps even his own identity in order to protect those he loved. But from what? And why? Hastings, ever the optimist, leaned forward. Poirot, do you think she was telling the truth? Could Lavoisier really have been involved in something that dangerous? Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly as he considered the question. Mon ami, I believe Lady Pennington spoke the truth, but not the whole truth. What she told us was a part of the puzzle, but there is much more that she is not revealing. She fears something or someone, and that fear, I believe, is at the heart of this mystery. Hastings frowned. So you think there's more to this conspiracy than we've been told? Poirot nodded slowly. Indeed, the truth is always more complicated than it appears, Hastings. There are always layers hidden beneath what is visible to the eye. Lady Pennington spoke of Lavoisier's fears, of the people who came to the house in the night. But who were these people? Why was Lavoisier so desperate to protect his wife from the truth? What exactly did he know? Hastings leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped behind his head. It seems like we're chasing ghosts, Poirot. Every time we think we're getting close, we find ourselves further away from the truth. Poirot's gaze turned thoughtful, as if he were pondering something far beyond the walls of the room. That may be true, Hastings, but I am not one to give up easily. No, I do not believe we are chasing ghosts. I believe we are chasing a very real and very dangerous secret, and we must find it before it disappears entirely. The two men sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of Poirot's words hanging in the air. Poirot, as always, had a plan. He just needed to figure out what it was. The mysteries that seemed to swirl around Lavoisier's disappearance were vast, and yet Poirot had the distinct feeling that he was on the cusp of something monumental. Later, that evening, Poirot and Hastings found themselves at the local constabulary, where they had arranged to meet with Inspector Montgomery. The gruff, no-nonsense officer had been keeping tabs on the investigation, though he had not been entirely convinced by Poirot's assertions. Nevertheless, the inspector had agreed to a meeting, perhaps in the hopes that Poirot's brilliance would shed some light on the case. As Poirot and Hastings entered the inspector's office, they were greeted by the sight of Montgomery hunched over a stack of papers, his eyes tired but alert. The officer looked up as they approached, his expression one of guarded skepticism. "Poirot," Montgomery said, his voice heavy with suspicion. "I must admit, I'm not entirely sure what you're trying to prove with this investigation. Lavoisier's disappearance is still a mystery, but we haven't found anything substantial to lead us to him or any answers." Poirot smiled, his ever-present charm still intact. "Ah, Inspector Montgomery, you are a man of facts, yes, but the truth is not always found in the most obvious places. You must learn to look beyond the surface." Montgomery frowned, clearly not understanding Poirot's cryptic comment. "What are you getting at, Poirot? I don't have time for riddles." Poirot's smile widened, though his eyes were sharp with intensity. "The riddle, my dear Inspector, is the very thing that will lead us to the truth. There is something, someone, who holds the key to this mystery. A witness, perhaps, who has been silent up until now. It is time to find that witness." Montgomery stood up, his face a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "I don't know what you're talking about, Poirot. We've questioned everyone involved. Pennington, Lavoisier's colleagues, even the servants. No one has seen or heard anything out of the ordinary." Poirot's eyes glittered with a quiet confidence. "Ah, but I beg to differ. There is one person who has remained strangely absent from our investigation. One person who may hold the answer to all of our questions." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "Who do you mean, Poirot?" Poirot turned to him, his face serious. "The butler, Hastings, the one who has served the Pennington family for many years. He may appear unremarkable, but it is often the quiet ones who observe the most. I believe he knows something important, something that could crack this case wide open." Inspector Montgomery snorted, clearly sceptical. "The butler? You've got to be kidding me, Poirot. What makes you think a mere servant could know anything about a wealthy gentleman's disappearance?" Poirot's gaze was unwavering. "Montgomery, you underestimate the power of observation. People often reveal more than they intend to. The butler has been in the house through all of the strange events, and he may have seen or heard something that none of us have noticed." The inspector grumbled, but finally relented. "All right, Poirot, I'll take your word for it. But if this turns out to be another one of your wild theories, you're on your own." The next morning, Poirot and Hastings returned to Pennington House. They made their way through the grand hallways, the silence of the mansion almost oppressive. The butler, a man named Mr. Reginald Barlow, was standing in the foyer, his expression as stoic as ever. He greeted the detectives with a polite nod, though his eyes flickered with something Poirot couldn't quite place. "Good morning, gentlemen," Barlow said, his voice soft but clear. "How may I assist you today?" Poirot studied him carefully, taking note of his every movement. "Ah, Mr. Barlow, we would like to speak with you regarding certain matters. May we have a moment of your time?" Barlow hesitated, his gaze flicking briefly towards the grand staircase before he nodded. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot, please follow me." The butler led them into a small sitting room, where Poirot and Hastings took their seats. Barlow remained standing, his posture impeccable. Poirot did not waste time with pleasantries. He had a very specific line of questioning in mind. "Mr. Barlow," Poirot began, his voice gentle but probing. "I understand that you have been in the employ of the Pennington family for many years. You must have observed many things during your time here. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual in the past few weeks? Anything at all that seemed out of the ordinary?" Barlow's expression remained unchanged, but Poirot could detect a slight tension in his shoulders. "I must admit, Monsieur Poirot, nothing unusual comes to mind. The household has been as it always is. Lady Pennington is understandably distressed by her husband's disappearance, but beyond that, there have been no strange occurrences." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "And what of the night of the disappearance? Was there anything about that night that struck you as odd? Any noises? Any visitors?" Barlow hesitated, his eyes darting to the door, as if seeking an escape. Poirot's keen observation skills did not miss this small but telling gesture. "Mr. Barlow," Poirot pressed, "you are a man of discretion, I can see that. But the truth is more important than any secret you may be keeping. I ask you again, did anything happen that night that you are not telling us?" For the first time, Barlow's stoic demeanour faltered. He shifted uncomfortably, his hands clenched tightly in front of him. There was something, Monsieur Poirot, something I did not understand at the time." Poirot's eyes locked onto his. "What did you hear, Mr. Barlow? What did you see?" Barlow took a deep breath, his face paling. "I heard voices in the hallway that night. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard the door to Mr. Lavoisier's study open. I saw someone standing in the doorway, someone I did not recognize. He was wearing a dark cloak, and he moved quickly, as if he didn't want to be seen." Poirot's mind raced. "And did you see where this person went?" Barlow shook his head. "No, Monsieur Poirot. He disappeared before I could get a better look, but I heard footsteps retreating down the hallway, toward the back of the house." Poirot sat back, his mind whirling. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The butler had witnessed something crucial, something that tied into the larger mystery of Lavoisier's disappearance. "Thank you, Mr. Barlow," Poirot said, his tone now more measured. "You have been most helpful. You may go now." As Barlow left the room, Poirot exchanged a look with Hastings. "This changes everything. Hastings, the man in the cloak, is our next lead. We must find him, and quickly." The search for the mysterious figure was on, and Poirot knew that the truth was closer than ever. But the final pieces of the puzzle were still elusive. Who was the cloaked figure, and what role did he play in the disappearance of Lavoisier? The answers were waiting to be uncovered, if only they could find the key. Chapter 9. The Cloak of Darkness. The days that followed the discovery of the mysterious cloaked figure moved with an air of heightened urgency. Hercule Poirot had always been one to trust in his instincts, and now those instincts were screaming that the disappearance of Lavoisier had more to it than mere personal choice. There was something darker at play, something far more complex than anyone could have guessed. The butler's description of the man in the cloak was the spark that ignited Poirot's desire to unravel the enigma once and for all. Poirot and Captain Hastings sat in Poirot's modest London apartment, going over the details of the investigation with intense focus. Papers, notes, and sketches were strewn across the table, each representing a piece of the puzzle that they were painstakingly trying to assemble. Poirot's mind moved methodically, as it always did, and it was clear that he had reached a critical point in the case. But there was still much to do. "We must act swiftly, Hastings," Poirot remarked, his voice low and serious. The man in the cloak could hold the key to everything. But it is not just the cloak that is important. It is the identity of the man who wore it. Why was he there? What was he doing in the house of Pennington? Hastings, sitting across from Poirot, nodded gravely. "I agree, Poirot. But how do we find him? Barlow said he disappeared too quickly. There must be something else that can help us." Poirot placed his fingers together, his mind working. "We have the key detail, the man's cloak, a dark, heavy cloak, and the fact that he moved swiftly and silently. This is not an ordinary person. No, this is someone who knows how to remain unnoticed." Hastings furrowed his brow. "You think it's someone who's been in the house before? Someone familiar with the layout?" Poirot gave him a small, knowing smile. "Precisely, mon ami. And the back of the house, the servants' quarters to be specific, were mentioned by Barlow. That is where the man was headed. That is where we must focus our attention." Poirot stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the busy street below. "We need to search the house again, but this time we will pay particular attention to the areas no one else would think to look. We must speak with Barlow again, and we must also examine the house's servants more closely. One of them may know more than they are willing to admit." Hastings stood up as well, clearly eager to continue the investigation. "I'll gather the men. We'll search the servants' quarters and see what turns up." Poirot turned, his gaze piercing. "No, Hastings. This is a delicate matter. We must not alarm anyone. I will speak with Barlow. You will accompany me, but do not make your presence too obvious. We need to observe, not to confront." With that, the two men set out for Pennington House once again, each with a sense of anticipation in the air. Poirot's sharp instincts told him that they were on the verge of a breakthrough. If only they could find the missing pieces of the puzzle. Upon their arrival at Pennington House, Poirot and Hastings were once again greeted by the stoic butler, Mr. Barlow. The man's expression was as unreadable as ever, but Poirot could sense that he was feeling the strain of the ongoing investigation. The air in the house felt tense, thick with unspoken words, as if the very walls held secrets that were desperate to remain hidden. "Mr. Barlow," Poirot began, his voice calm and measured, "I would like to speak with you again. There is more to this story than we have yet uncovered. Please, walk with me." The butler hesitated for a moment, then nodded, leading the detectives down a corridor toward the back of the house. They passed rooms that had once seemed so familiar, but now felt more like an alien landscape. The silence in the house was oppressive, broken only by the soft sound of footsteps on the floor. Once they reached a small study, Barlow turned to Poirot, his face still impassive. "What more do you need to know, Monsieur Poirot? I have told you all I know." Poirot took a seat at the desk, his fingers lightly tapping against the wood. "You have been most helpful, Mr. Barlow, but there is still something that I do not understand. When you saw the cloaked figure in the hallway, you said you heard footsteps retreating toward the back of the house. But tell me, Mr. Barlow, what did you do after that? What did you see next?" Barlow's eyes flickered nervously. "I did not go after him. I stayed in my quarters, Monsieur Poirot. I was afraid." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Afraid? Of what, Mr. Barlow?" The butler hesitated for a long moment before speaking. I did not recognize the man, but he did not seem like an ordinary visitor. There was something unsettling about him, the way he moved, the way he blended into the shadows. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to act." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And did you see anything else that night, Mr. Barlow? Any other strange occurrences?" Barlow shook his head. "No, Monsieur Poirot, that was all." Poirot rose to his feet, his face serious. "Very well. You have been honest with me, Mr. Barlow. But I will not stop until I find the truth. You may go." As Barlow left the room, Poirot turned to Hastings, who had been observing the conversation with quiet interest. "Hastings, I believe we have the information we need. It is clear that the man in the cloak was not a random intruder. He was here for a reason, and that reason is tied to Lavoisier's disappearance." Hastings frowned. "But what reason? What could he possibly want?" Poirot smiled, though there was little humour in it. "That, my friend, is what we must discover." The following day, Poirot and Hastings visited the servants' quarters, where they spoke with a number of the house staff. Most of them seemed to know very little about the strange happenings surrounding Lavoisier's disappearance. But Poirot's keen eye and sharper mind led him to a young maid named Alice, who seemed more nervous than the others. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke with Poirot, and there was an air of unease about her that caught Poirot's attention. "Alice," Poirot said gently, "I would like to ask you some questions. You have worked here for some time, have you not?" The young maid nodded, her eyes darting around nervously. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, I have worked here for 3 years." Poirot studied her closely. "And in all that time, have you ever seen anything unusual? Anything that seemed out of place?" Alice hesitated before answering. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. Everything is as it always has been." Poirot's gaze softened, though his eyes remained sharp. "Alice, I do not wish to alarm you, but I need to know the truth. The night Mr. Lavoisier disappeared, did you see anything unusual? Perhaps a visitor? Or did you hear anything strange?" Alice's face paled, and she looked down at the floor. I did hear something, Monsieur Poirot. I heard footsteps outside the kitchen door that night. It was very late, and I thought I was the only one still awake." Poirot leaned forward, sensing an opening. "Footsteps, you say? And what did you do?" Alice looked up at Poirot, her eyes wide. "I didn't do anything. I didn't see anyone. But there was a shadow outside the window. I thought I saw someone moving near the back of the house." Poirot's heart quickened. "A shadow, you say? And did you recognize this person?" Alice shook her head. "No, Monsieur Poirot, I didn't recognize them. But they were wearing a dark cloak." Poirot's mind raced as the pieces began to fit together. The figure in the cloak, the shadows, the secrecy surrounding Lavoisier's disappearance. It all pointed to something much larger than he had originally suspected. The question now was, what was the secret that Lavoisier had been hiding? With a small smile of satisfaction, Poirot stood up and turned to Hastings. "Hastings, we have discovered something of great importance. The man in the cloak was not simply an intruder. He was someone who knew exactly where to go and when to act. And the fact that Alice saw him confirms that he was not just a figment of imagination. He is very real and very dangerous. Hastings nodded, understanding the gravity of Poirot's words. So, what's our next step, Poirot? Poirot's gaze hardened with determination. We must uncover the truth behind Lavoisier's disappearance. This man in the cloak knows something, and I intend to find out what it is. But first, we must return to the scene of the crime. We are not finished yet. As Poirot and Hastings prepared to return to Pennington House, the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the mystery was far from solved. Who was the cloaked man, and what had he done to Lavoisier? The answers lay hidden in the shadows, and it was up to Poirot to bring them into the light. Chapter 10. The Shadow's Embrace. The morning mist had not yet lifted when Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings arrived at Pennington House once again. The mansion, standing in its familiar grandeur, seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. The investigation had taken an unexpected turn, with the cloaked figure and the young maid, Alice, providing crucial clues that Poirot was confident would bring him closer to the truth. Yet there was a sense of urgency in the air, a nagging feeling that time was running out, and the mystery of Lavoisier's disappearance was far from solved. Poirot's mind was a labyrinth, and each clue, each detail, was a piece of the intricate puzzle he had to put together. His focus sharpened as he approached the door of the mansion. His keen eyes scanned the surroundings, noticing the smallest changes in the landscape. The soft rustle of leaves in the garden, the stillness of the windows, the faint scent of dust that lingered in the corners of the house. These were all signs that something was amiss, and Poirot knew better than to overlook any of them. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft but resolute, "we must tread carefully now. We are at the precipice of something great. I feel it in my bones, but we must not be hasty. The truth, Hastings, is often more elusive than it seems." Hastings, as ever, followed Poirot's lead, though he was visibly frustrated by the lack of concrete answers. "You're right, Poirot, but we're running out of time. The longer Lavoisier is missing, the more likely it becomes that he's beyond our reach." Poirot turned to his friend with a reassuring smile. "Do not worry, Hastings. We will find him. I promise you this. But first, we must go over everything we know once more. No stone can be left unturned." As they entered the house, the butler, Mr. Barlow, was waiting for them. His usual composure had been replaced with a nervousness that Poirot could easily detect. His eyes darted around, as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows at any moment. "Mr. Barlow," Poirot greeted him warmly, though there was a glint of suspicion in his eyes. "I trust we are not disturbing your routine." Barlow swallowed hard before responding. "Not at all, Monsieur Poirot. But I must admit, the house has been uneasy ever since the incident. There is a tension in the air, one that I cannot shake." Poirot nodded knowingly. "I understand, Mr. Barlow. You have been most cooperative, and I am grateful for that. But today I require your assistance once again. We must return to the servants' quarters." Barlow stiffened at the mention of the servants' quarters. "But, Monsieur Poirot, there is nothing more to find there. The staff has been questioned. There are no further leads." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You are mistaken, Mr. Barlow. The answers lie within those walls. You see, there is one thing that has troubled me. You say the man in the cloak disappeared quickly. But there is more to that story. What if he didn't disappear, Mr. Barlow? What if he was hiding in plain sight, right here in this house?" Barlow shifted uncomfortably, but he said nothing. Poirot's gaze remained steady, and he could see the butler's resolve starting to crack. There was something that Barlow knew, something that had been concealed in the shadows for far too long. "We will return to the servants' quarters, Mr. Barlow," Poirot insisted, his voice firm. "But this time we will look more closely. There is always something that remains hidden, something that escapes even the sharpest eyes. I am certain of it." The butler reluctantly led Poirot and Hastings down the narrow hallway to the servants' quarters, where the staff's rooms were tucked away in a corner of the house. As they approached the area, Poirot's mind raced. The man in the cloak was no mere passer-by. He had a purpose, one that extended beyond a simple robbery or mischief. But what was that purpose? The more Poirot thought about it, the more his suspicions grew. There was something personal about this mystery. Lavoisier's disappearance was no accident. It was deliberate. The door to the servants' quarters creaked open, and Poirot stepped inside. The space was modest, but neat. The walls were adorned with simple paintings, and the furniture was functional, if not a little worn. The maid Alice had been the first to mention the shadow outside the window. Her description of the figure had been vague, but it had been enough to confirm Poirot's suspicions. The cloaked figure had not been some random intruder. He had been a part of this house's fabric. Poirot turned to Barlow. "Show me the room where Alice works. We must speak with her again." Barlow hesitated, before nodding and leading them to a small, dimly lit room at the end of the hall. The room had a window that faced the back of the house, overlooking the garden and the service entrance. Alice was there, dusting off a small table. When she saw Poirot and Hastings, her eyes widened in surprise, and she quickly curtsied. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I did not expect to see you again so soon." Poirot offered her a reassuring smile. "My dear Alice, I must apologize for troubling you once more, but your assistance has been invaluable. I have some additional questions for you, if you do not mind." Alice looked nervously between Poirot and Barlow. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I will answer whatever you wish." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze gentle but probing. "Alice, you mentioned that you saw a shadow outside your window the night that Lavoisier disappeared. Do you recall anything else? Anything at all that seemed unusual about that night?" Alice's brow furrowed as she thought back. "Well, I did hear something that night. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard footsteps. They were soft, like someone trying to be quiet." "Where did the footsteps come from?" Poirot asked, his voice steady. Elise looked down, her hands trembling. "From outside the window, Monsieur Poirot. They were moving along the garden path towards the back door." Poirot's mind raced. The back door, the same door that led to the servants' quarters, the same door that was close to the area where the cloaked man had been seen. It was clear now. The man had not simply vanished. He had been waiting for the right moment to strike, to make his move. But why? And who was he? Alice, Poirot continued, his voice soft but insistent. Did you ever see the face of the man who wore the cloak? Alice shook her head. No, Monsieur Poirot. It was too dark, and he was moving too fast, but I could see the outline of his figure. He was tall, and the cloak was large, like it could hide someone completely. Poirot paused, letting the words sink in. He could feel that they were close, so very close to unravelling the mystery. But there was still a missing piece. He had seen enough to know that the cloak was important. It was a symbol, a cover, an enigma in itself. But who was the man behind it? And what was his connection to Lavoisier? Hastings, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. Poirot, do you think the man in the cloak is still in the house? Could he be hiding here? Poirot's eyes flickered with understanding. That is a possibility, Hastings. A very strong possibility. But we must not act rashly. We need to be certain. With a renewed sense of determination, Poirot turned back to Alice. Alice, did you ever notice anything unusual in the garden? Any sign that someone had been there recently? Alice thought for a moment before shaking her head. I don't know, Monsieur Poirot. The garden is always quiet at night. I didn't see anything strange. Poirot's gaze hardened with resolve. Very well, Alice. You have been most helpful. You may go now. As Alice left the room, Poirot turned to Barlow, his face set in grim determination. Mr. Barlow, it is clear now that the cloaked man has a connection to this house, and that he has been hiding in plain sight. But we need to know more. We must search the house thoroughly, and we must do so without alerting anyone. Barlow, though clearly uneasy, nodded. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I will assist you however I can. Poirot's eyes sparkled with a quiet intensity. This case is not over, Barlow. Not by a long shot. We will find the truth, and when we do, the shadows will no longer hold their secrets. As Poirot and Hastings prepared to search the house from top to bottom, one thing was clear. The man in the cloak was not just a random figure. He was part of a much larger story, one that was about to unfold in the most unexpected of ways, and Poirot was determined to see it through to the end, no matter what secrets the shadows might reveal. Chapter 11. The Cloak of Deception. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the dusty curtains, casting long shadows in the grand hall of Pennington House. The walls were lined with faded tapestries and portraits of long-dead ancestors who seemed to watch with critical eyes. The atmosphere in the house had grown heavier, like the air before a storm. Every creak of the floorboards beneath Poirot's polished shoes seemed to echo in the stillness, a reminder that he was not alone in his thoughts. For days, Hercule Poirot had been piecing together the mystery of the vanishing gentleman, the elusive figure in the cloak who seemed to haunt Pennington House like a spectre from the past. Despite the clues that had led him here, the final answer was as elusive as ever. The disappearance of Lavoisier, the odd behaviour of the house's inhabitants, the cryptic conversations he'd overheard, all of it pointed to one undeniable truth. The answers lay hidden within the house itself. Poirot stood still for a moment, his keen eyes scanning the hallway with a practiced precision. The investigation had reached a critical juncture. He could feel it in his gut. The time for theory and assumption had passed. The time for action had arrived. Mon ami, Poirot said softly, turning to Captain Hastings, who stood beside him, deep in thought. We have reached a turning point. The truth is close, closer than I have ever been in this case. But we must be careful. If we make a mistake now, the shadows will remain, and we will lose our chance to uncover what lies beneath. Hastings, who had been unusually quiet, looked at Poirot with furrowed brows. What do you suggest we do, Poirot? We've questioned everyone, searched every room, and yet we still don't have a solid lead. I'm beginning to think this man in the cloak has slipped away from us for good. Poirot smiled, a small but knowing curve of his lips. Ah, mon ami, you underestimate me. The clues are all here, Hastings. They always have been. We simply need to look deeper, beyond what is immediately visible. The house holds its secrets, every nook, every cranny. We must search it as though it were a living thing, hiding its heart from us. As Poirot spoke, his mind raced back to the many subtle inconsistencies he had noted during the investigation. The behaviour of Mr. Barlow, the butler, had seemed strange from the very beginning. His nervous demeanour, his reluctance to speak openly about the happenings at Pennington House, all pointed to a man who was either hiding something or complicit in the mystery that surrounded Lavoisier's disappearance. Poirot's gaze shifted to the grand staircase leading up to the upper floors. He had yet to explore the attic, an area of the house that the staff seldom mentioned and even less often ventured into. It was an old space, filled with forgotten relics and cobwebbed memories, but Poirot knew that it was precisely the kind of place where secrets were kept. "Captain Hastings," Poirot said, turning with a sense of urgency, "we must go to the attic. There is something there that I am certain will shed light on this case." Hastings raised an eyebrow, a mixture of surprise and skepticism written on his face. "The attic? Poirot, do you really think there's anything up there that could help us? It seems like an odd place to look, don't you think?" Poirot's eyes sparkled with determination. "Trust me, Hastings, there are no coincidences in a case like this. Every detail, no matter how small, has a purpose. We will go to the attic and see what we can find." Without waiting for a response, Poirot began to ascend the staircase with his usual purposeful stride, his coat trailing behind him like a shadow. Hastings followed, though he was clearly puzzled by Poirot's sudden resolve. The upper floors of Pennington House were quiet, the rooms dark and filled with the smell of old wood and dust. The air seemed thick, heavy with the weight of years of secrets. At the top of the stairs, Poirot paused before a small door at the end of the hall. It was an old wooden door, with chipped paint and rusted hinges. No one had likely opened it in years, but Poirot knew that this door was the key to unlocking the mystery that had plagued them for so long. With a careful hand, Poirot turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. The attic was just as he had expected. A cluttered space filled with old furniture, trunks, and forgotten artifacts from a bygone era. Dust hung thick in the air, and the room smelled of mildew and decay. Yet, amidst the forgotten relics of time, Poirot's trained eye immediately picked out something unusual. Near the far corner of the room, partially hidden beneath a large tarpaulin, was a chest. It was an old, ornate piece, intricately carved and adorned with gold fittings. The chest was positioned in such a way that it almost seemed to blend into the surroundings, as if trying to remain unseen. Poirot's heart quickened as he approached the chest. He could feel it. This was no ordinary piece of furniture. It was something that had been deliberately placed here, carefully concealed, just out of sight. The question was, why, Hastings? Poirot said softly, his voice filled with an almost reverent tone. I believe we have found what we were looking for. Hastings, who had been silently following behind, stepped forward and peered over Poirot's shoulder. What do you think's inside, Poirot? Poirot's lips curled into a smile. Only one way to find out, my friend. With great care, Poirot moved the tarpaulin aside, revealing the chest in full. The intricate carvings on the lid were in the shape of swirling patterns, symbols that seemed oddly familiar. Poirot ran his fingers over the surface, noting the coolness of the wood and the smoothness of the carvings. This chest had been here for many years, and yet it still felt as though it had a life of its own. Poirot knelt down and carefully inspected the chest's lock. It was old but not broken, and appeared to be a sturdy mechanism. A small brass keyhole glinted in the dim light. Ah, Poirot said softly, a lock that only one key can open. We must find the key, Hastings. Hastings looked around the attic, his eyes scanning the cluttered space for any sign of the key. Where do you think it could be? We don't have time to search the whole room. Poirot stood up, his expression thoughtful. No, we do not have time. But there is a simpler solution. A key must be kept nearby, and it is likely that the one who placed the chest here also knew where to keep the key. Poirot's eyes flickered to the nearby desk, a small wooden table cluttered with papers and old books. There, tucked into the corner, was a small brass key. It was simple, unadorned, but Poirot knew instantly that it was the key to the chest. With a steady hand, Poirot picked up the key and inserted it into the lock. It turned easily, and with a soft click, the chest opened. Inside, they found a collection of old letters, documents, and a small faded journal. Poirot picked up the journal carefully, his fingers brushing against the worn leather cover. The pages were yellowed with age, but the ink was still legible. The journal appeared to belong to someone named L.J., and was filled with cryptic notes and sketches, most of them about the Pennington family and the mansion itself. Poirot flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the notes quickly. Many of the entries were disjointed, as though the writer had been under some sort of stress or duress. One particular entry caught his attention. The cloak hides all. The master will not be pleased, but it must be done. The key must remain hidden, for if it is found, all is lost. Poirot's heart raced as he read the passage. The cloak, the key, the hidden messages, everything was starting to make sense. This journal belonged to someone who had been involved in the conspiracy surrounding Lavoisier's disappearance. Someone who had known about the secret within Pennington House and who had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. This is it, Poirot whispered. This is the truth we've been seeking, Hastings. Hastings, who had been watching Poirot closely, stepped forward. What does it mean, Poirot? What are we looking at? Poirot closed the journal and looked up at his friend. "It means, mon ami, that we are dealing with something far more intricate than we first imagined. The cloak, the key, and the hidden journal all point to one conclusion. The disappearance of Lavoisier was not an accident. It was a calculated move, and the answers lie within the secrets of Pennington House." Hastings nodded slowly, his mind beginning to grasp the enormity of the situation. "So, what now, Poirot? What do we do next?" Poirot stood up, his expression determined. "Now, we follow the trail. We expose the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried. And when we do, the man in the cloak will no longer be able to hide." Chapter 12. The Secrets of the Past. The day had drawn to a close by the time Poirot and Captain Hastings returned to the heart of Pennington House. The evening's shadows seemed to stretch longer, as though the mansion itself were preparing for something ominous. The weight of the mystery that had unfolded around them hung thick in the air, and each step they took felt laden with the ghosts of those who had walked the halls long before them. Yet Hercule Poirot remained resolute. His mind, sharp and undistracted, was now on the brink of an answer. The journal, its worn leather cover and fragile pages now resting on the heavy wooden table before him, was their key to the puzzle, one that had long remained elusive to even the sharpest eyes. The strange cryptic writing in it, coupled with the references to the cloak and the hidden key, revealed a conspiracy so deeply rooted in Pennington House that even the most observant eye might miss it. Poirot's fingers traced the delicate edge of the journal as his thoughts raced. The identity of the cloaked figure had remained unclear, an enigma that had haunted the investigation since the beginning. But now, the more Poirot turned over the journal's notes in his mind, the clearer the picture became. The figure, the key, and the cloak were not merely metaphors. They were physical objects, artifacts tied to the very fabric of Pennington House. Beside him, Hastings paced nervously, his hands jammed in his pockets. "Poirot, I still don't understand. What does all this mean? Who wrote this journal, and why hide it up there in the attic?" Poirot lifted his eyes from the journal and met Hastings's gaze, a gleam of understanding reflected in them. This journal, Hastings, was written by someone very close to the Pennington family. But it was not written by any ordinary member. No, mon ami, this was penned by someone with a far greater connection to the family's darkest secrets. The person who wrote this was the very one who has been hiding in plain sight, the vanishing gentleman. Hastings blinked, confusion still lingering in his expression. "But who?" Poirot held up a hand, silencing him with a calm gesture. "Patience, Hastings. The answer will become clear in due time. What we must focus on now is the information contained within these pages. The cloak, the key, and the fact that it is all so carefully hidden point to one fact. Someone wanted to keep the truth buried, to ensure it would never see the light of day." Poirot's mind raced back to the history of Pennington House. The mansion, with its sprawling estate and rich heritage, had always been a place of great mystery. The Pennington family, though esteemed, had never been without their controversies. The family's connections to old aristocratic circles had often been overshadowed by whispers of questionable dealings, hidden alliances, and power struggles. Poirot skimmed through the journal once more. He paused on a passage that made his pulse quicken. It spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the house, a secret space that had been locked away for generations, its location known only to a select few. This chamber, according to the journal, contained the final piece of the puzzle, the item that would explain everything, the true nature of the cloak, the key, and the mysterious disappearance of Lavoisier. "The chamber," Poirot whispered, as though the very word was a summons, his mind whirred, connecting dots faster than Hastings could follow. "The cloak, Hastings," Poirot continued, his voice filled with conviction. "It is more than a mere garment. It is a symbol, a signal of a deep hidden pact. Whoever controls the cloak controls the key to this chamber. And if we are to uncover the truth, we must find this hidden place." "But how?" Hastings interjected, frustration creeping into his voice. "The journal doesn't give us a map. It's all riddles and cryptic notes. Where do we even start looking?" Poirot's lips curled into a small but reassuring smile. "Ah, mon ami, that is where we differ. I see not just the words in the journal, but the patterns. Each piece of this puzzle has been carefully laid out, and now, with the journal in our possession, we are ready to follow the trail." With sudden urgency, Poirot stood up from the table and walked to the window. The moonlight bathed the house in an eerie glow, and the distant howling of the wind added to the sense of foreboding that gripped the night. He turned to Hastings, his expression set. "We will begin tomorrow, Hastings. We will search for the hidden chamber, and when we find it, we will have the answers we seek." The next morning, the sun had barely risen, and the mist from the nearby woods still clung to the ground like a shroud. Poirot and Hastings stood in the grand foyer, the house still shrouded in silence. The stillness was broken only by the faint sound of a clock ticking in the hallway. Poirot had already made his plans, and now it was time to put them into action. "Firdim, begin with the library," Poirot declared, his eyes narrowing with determination. The journal mentioned a book, a specific volume in the Pennington family library, that holds the key to understanding the chamber's location. We will start there. The library, though grand, was a place that few had visited in recent years. Its towering shelves filled with dusty volumes gave off the unmistakable scent of old leather and parchment. As Poirot and Hastings stepped inside, the room seemed to welcome them, as if it too were aware of the mission they had embarked upon. Poirot walked slowly between the shelves, his hands trailing over the spines of the books, as though they held the answers he sought. He muttered softly to himself, scanning the titles, each one a small universe unto itself. After a few moments, Poirot stopped in front of a large ornate volume that had caught his attention. "The History of Pennington House," he read aloud, carefully pulling the book from the shelf. It was old, its cover cracked and worn, but there was something about it that seemed to call to him. With a practiced motion, Poirot flipped the book open, his eyes scanning the pages. The book was filled with the history of the Pennington family, its rise to power, its struggles, and its eventual fall from grace. But as Poirot read, he noticed a strange pattern in the margins of the pages. Small annotations, written in an elegant, precise hand, hinted at something more than just the family's history. They spoke of hidden rooms, cryptic symbols, and a powerful secret buried deep within the house. Poirot's heart raced as he read one particular passage. The heart of Pennington House lies beneath. In the space where time stands still, the key must be found. Beware the cloak, for it binds all. This is it, Poirot whispered, his voice filled with a sense of triumph. The library holds the final clue. The hidden chamber is beneath us, but the question is where? He turned to Hastings, his expression thoughtful. Mon ami, we must find the place where time stands still. The heart of Pennington House is buried deep, but we will uncover it. As Poirot and Hastings delved deeper into the family's history and the cryptic references scattered throughout the library, they soon discovered that the hidden chamber was not just a physical space. It was a place where the family's darkest secrets had been stored, a place that no one had dared to speak of for generations. By late afternoon, Poirot and Hastings had scoured every inch of the library, searching for the final clue. Finally, Poirot stopped in front of a large portrait of the original founder of the Pennington family, an imposing figure dressed in fine robes. He had been studying the painting for some time, and now he seemed to sense something was out of place. Itudio is here, Poirot said softly, his voice filled with certainty. The painting is not merely a portrait, it is a map. Hastings looked at him in confusion. A map? Poirot, how could a painting be a map? Poirot's eyes gleamed. It is a map, Hastings, not in the traditional sense, but in the sense of symbolism. The figure in this portrait holds the key. The way he stands, the direction he faces, these are the coordinates we need to follow. Poirot's finger traced the edge of the painting, and he muttered a few words under his breath. With a soft click, the painting shifted, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. Inside, there was a small, ancient-looking key, along with a note. Poirot picked up the key carefully, his hands steady. This, he said, his voice barely a whisper, is the key to the chamber. And with that, Poirot knew that they were on the verge of uncovering the truth. The vanishing gentleman, the cloak, the key. It all pointed to a final revelation, one that would change everything. But the question remained, would they be able to uncover the secrets of Pennington House before it was too late? Chapter 13. The Cloak and the Key. The air was thick with anticipation as Hercule Poirot stood in front of the hidden compartment revealed behind the portrait of the Pennington founder. His fingers lightly traced the ancient key in his hand, a key whose weight seemed to carry the knowledge of centuries. Beside him, Captain Hastings looked on in astonishment, still not fully understanding the gravity of what they had uncovered. "What do we do now, Poirot?" Hastings asked, his voice betraying a mix of wonder and concern. "We have the key, but where does it lead us?" Poirot's eyes glistened with excitement as he carefully placed the key in the pocket of his coat. He stepped back, his mind already racing through the possibilities, his thoughts assembling like the final pieces of a complex puzzle. "The key is but one part of the equation, mon ami," Poirot replied. "The cloak, the key, and the hidden chamber, each has its place in this grand mystery. What we must do now is follow the trail, no matter where it leads us." With a decisive nod, Poirot turned and headed for the door of the library. signalling to Hastings that it was time to leave. Their search had brought them this far, but there was still much to uncover. The journal, the strange markings, the cryptic notes, they all pointed to a final, hidden truth. And only by finding the truth could they hope to uncover the identity of the vanishing gentleman. The mansion was eerily silent as the two men walked down the long corridors, their footsteps echoing against the stone walls. The vastness of Pennington House, with its labyrinthine halls and rooms, seemed to swallow them up, making each step feel more isolated than the last. But Poirot, ever calm, appeared unfazed by the unsettling atmosphere. His mind was sharp, his focus unwavering. "I believe the next step, Hastings," Poirot said as they walked, "is to find the cloak. The key, while important, is only part of the mystery. The cloak, on the other hand, is the symbol that binds everything together. We must locate it if we are to uncover the full truth." "But where do we start looking for it?" Hastings asked, his voice still filled with confusion. Poirot's lips curled into a faint smile. "The cloak has been hidden in plain sight, Hastings. It has been with us all along, but its significance has gone unnoticed. The cloak is not just a garment. It is the key to unlocking the final door." They continued down the long corridor, the walls adorned with rich tapestries and family portraits. Each painting seemed to watch them as they passed, the faces of the Pennington ancestors frozen in time. Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was somehow alive, its walls full of secrets waiting to be uncovered. As they approached the main staircase, Poirot suddenly stopped, his keen eyes scanning the room. "Ah," he murmured, "I believe we are close now." Hastings looked around, his gaze falling on a large, ornate mirror that hung on the wall beside them. The mirror, framed in gold, was intricately designed with vines and flowers. But it was the reflection in the glass that caught Poirot's attention. In the mirror, the two men appeared as though they were standing beside an old armoire in the corner of the room. Poirot's sharp eyes noticed something strange about the armoire, a small detail that seemed out of place. Without a word, Poirot moved towards the armoire, his footsteps quiet and measured. Hastings followed closely behind, still unsure of what Poirot had seen. When Poirot reached the armoire, he gently pressed his hand against the wooden surface. He ran his fingers along the edges, testing for any hidden mechanisms. It wasn't long before he found what he was looking for: a small, barely noticeable button near the bottom of the armoire's frame. With a soft click, the armoire's door swung open. Inside the armoire was a deep, dark space, and at the back of the compartment, nestled among the shadows, was the cloak. The heavy, dark fabric gleamed faintly in the dim light, its intricate patterns almost hidden beneath the layers of dust and cobwebs. It was an old cloak, but it was clearly no ordinary garment. The fabric shimmered as if it were alive, shifting with every movement of light. A cloak of such mysterious design could only belong to someone of great significance, and perhaps someone with a connection to the vanishing gentleman. Poirot carefully reached into the armoire and retrieved the cloak. As he held it in his hands, he could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. The cloak was more than just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol, an emblem of power and secrecy. "This is it," Poirot said, his voice filled with a mixture of reverence and triumph. "The cloak has been hidden here all along, just as I suspected. And now we have all the pieces of the puzzle." Hastings stood beside him, staring at the cloak with awe. "But what does it all mean, Poirot? Who is the vanishing gentleman? And why has he gone to such lengths to keep all of this hidden?" Poirot turned to face his friend, his expression calm but determined. "The vanishing gentleman, Hastings, is not a single person. He is a symbol, an idea. Someone has been using the legend of the vanishing gentleman to cover up a much deeper conspiracy, one that goes back generations." Poirot's mind raced as he pieced together the final details of the mystery. The vanishing gentleman, the cloak, the key. It was all connected to the Pennington family and the dark secrets they had tried to bury. The cloak was not just a disguise. It was a tool, a way for the true mastermind behind the conspiracy to operate in the shadows, unseen by those around him. As Poirot studied the cloak more closely, he noticed something hidden within the folds of the fabric. A small metallic object was sewn into the lining, almost invisible to the naked eye. He carefully pried it free, revealing a small ornate pin. The pin was shaped like an eye, its surface encrusted with tiny, sparkling gems. It was a symbol that Poirot recognized immediately. "This," Poirot said, holding the pin up to the light, "is the emblem of the Pennington family's secret society. The same society that has been pulling the strings behind the scenes for centuries. The vanishing gentleman is not just an individual. He is the leader of this society, and his cloak is the key to his power." Hastings stared at the pin in shock. A secret society? But why would they want to keep all of this hidden? What could they possibly be trying to protect? Poirot's eyes narrowed, and his voice grew darker. "The answer, Hastings, lies in the history of the Pennington family. For generations the family has controlled great wealth and influence. But there is a secret buried beneath that wealth, a secret so dangerous that it could destroy everything they have built. And the vanishing gentleman, the cloak, and the key all point to one thing. The truth about that secret is about to come to light." Poirot paused for a moment, his mind turning over the final pieces of the puzzle. "We must go to the hidden chamber now. The truth lies within it, and once we open that door, we will uncover the dark history that has been hidden for so long." The journey to the hidden chamber was fraught with tension. Poirot and Hastings made their way through the vast halls of Pennington House, each step bringing them closer to the truth. The house, once grand and stately, now felt like a tomb, its dark corners filled with shadows that seemed to move on their own. The air was thick with the weight of centuries of secrets. When they reached the end of the long corridor, Poirot stopped in front of an unassuming door, hidden behind a tapestry. The door was small and plain, but Poirot knew that it held the key to everything. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the key they had found in the library. With a steady hand, he inserted it into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase that led down into the depths of the house. Hastings swallowed hard, his nerves on edge. "Do you think we're ready for this, Poirot?" Poirot turned to him, his face calm and composed. "We are ready, mon ami. The truth is waiting for us below, and there is no turning back now." Together they descended into the darkness, the faint glow of Poirot's lantern casting long shadows on the walls. The air grew colder as they descended further, the silence broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space below. At the bottom of the stairs they reached a large ancient door. It was made of heavy oak, its surface worn and cracked with age. A strange symbol was carved into the wood, an intricate design of interlocking circles like a twisted labyrinth. The same symbol was etched into the back of the cloak, a reminder that they were on the verge of uncovering something much larger than they had ever imagined. Poirot took a deep breath, his fingers brushing against the symbol. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "We are about to uncover the secrets of the past." He pushed open the door, and as it creaked open, they were greeted by a sight that left them both breathless. Inside the chamber, the walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty, forgotten books and relics. In the centre of the room stood a large pedestal, on which rested a stone tablet covered in ancient inscriptions. The air was thick with the smell of age and decay, but there was a sense of reverence in the chamber, as though the very room itself held the weight of centuries, of history. Poirot stepped forward, his heart racing with anticipation. He knew that the answers they sought were within this chamber. The vanishing gentleman, the cloak, the key, it was all here. And as Poirot carefully approached the pedestal, he knew that the final chapter of this mystery was about to unfold. Chapter 14. The Secrets Revealed. The air in the hidden chamber was thick with the weight of history, the kind of history that was meant to stay buried. Hercule Poirot stood before the stone tablet, his eyes scanning the ancient inscriptions that adorned its surface. The chamber was bathed in a dim light that flickered from the lantern in his hand, casting shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. Behind him, Captain Hastings stood silently, his gaze fixed on the strange markings. The sight of the stone tablet was awe-inspiring, but it was the aura of mystery that hung over the room that truly captivated them both. The dark secrets of the Pennington family had remained hidden for centuries, but now, in this very chamber, the veil was about to be lifted. Poirot stepped closer to the pedestal, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out to touch the cold surface of the stone tablet. He could feel the vibrations of centuries-old knowledge pulsing beneath his fingers, and it was as if the stone itself was alive, carrying within it the echoes of forgotten times. Hastings, though not as attuned to the subtleties of the mystery as Poirot, could sense the significance of the moment. He stepped forward, his voice hushed. "What do you think, Poirot? What does it say?" Poirot straightened, his face a mask of concentration. "This is the key, Hastings," he said softly. "The final piece of the puzzle. The cloak, the key, the society, and now the truth. Everything comes together here." The inscriptions on the stone tablet were written in an ancient language, one that Poirot recognized as a long-forgotten dialect of Latin. He studied the words carefully, his mind racing to decipher their meaning. His knowledge of languages, honed over years of solving mysteries, was put to the test, but Poirot's mind was as sharp as ever. "Ah, it becomes clear now," Poirot murmured. This tablet was created by the Pennington family's ancestors, the founders of the secret society that has been pulling the strings behind the scenes for centuries. Hastings frowned. A secret society? But what was their purpose? Why go to such lengths to hide everything? Poirot stepped back, his gaze never leaving the tablet. The Pennington family was not just a wealthy, influential family, Hastings. They were the keepers of a dark secret, one that could bring down the very foundations of their power. And to protect that secret, they created a society, a network, of individuals who would work in the shadows to keep the truth buried. Hastings blinked, clearly stunned by the implications. And the Vanishing Gentleman, is he part of this society? Poirot's eyes narrowed. The Vanishing Gentleman is the leader of this society, Hastings. But he is no ordinary man. He is a figurehead, a symbol of power. And behind him there is a shadow that has been pulling the strings for generations. Hastings was quiet for a moment, processing the information. So, the cloak was a symbol, a means for him to operate in secrecy. Poirot nodded. Exactly. The cloak allowed him to move unnoticed, to work behind the scenes without being seen. And the key is the final part of the puzzle. It opens the door to the truth that has been hidden away for centuries. Poirot turned his attention back to the tablet, his fingers tracing the inscriptions. As he did so, a cheered, faint click echoed through the chamber. The stone tablet, which had seemed immovable just moments before, now shifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment within. The compartment was small, no bigger than a drawer, but it held something that made Poirot's heart race with excitement. Inside, there was a small wooden box, intricately carved with the same symbol that had appeared on the cloak and the key, the symbol of the Pennington family's secret society. Poirot carefully lifted the box from its compartment and placed it on the pedestal. Hastings, his curiosity piqued, stepped closer to see what was inside. The box creaked as Poirot opened it, revealing a collection of delicate items. There were small pieces of parchment, each one inscribed with strange symbols and diagrams. There was a ring, its surface covered in intricate engravings, and a small vial filled with a dark, viscous liquid. Poirot's eyes gleamed with recognition as he lifted the ring from the box. This, Hastings, is the signet of the Pennington family. It was used to seal their most secret documents, and it is said to hold the power to unlock even the deepest mysteries of their society. Hastings was mesmerized. And the liquid? What is that? Poirot's expression grew darker. That, my friend, is the final key to the mystery. It is an ancient elixir, one that was believed to grant those who consumed it access to forbidden knowledge. The Vanishing Gentleman and those who came before him used this liquid to enhance their abilities, to see into the future, and to bend others to their will. Hastings recoiled slightly. That sounds like something out of a legend. Are you telling me that this elixir actually exists? Poirot nodded gravely. Indeed, it does. And it is this elixir that has given the Pennington family its power for centuries. The Vanishing Gentleman used it to maintain control over his followers, to manipulate events from the shadows. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air. Hastings could hardly believe what he was hearing. but the evidence was before them, undeniable and tangible. The Pennington family, the secret society, the vanishing gentleman, everything that had seemed like a distant legend was now very real, and the truth was more terrifying than either of them could have imagined. Poirot carefully closed the box, his fingers lingering on the lid for a moment. The secret society has controlled the Pennington family's legacy for centuries, Hastings, and now we must uncover the final truth, the truth that the vanishing gentleman has been hiding all these years. Hastings looked at him, his brow furrowed. But what is that truth? What could be so important that they would go to such lengths? To keep it hidden? Poirot's gaze was steady, his voice firm. The truth, Hastings, is that the Pennington family was not the first to possess this power. The knowledge they sought to protect, the power they fought to control, was not theirs to begin with. It was ancient, far older than the family itself, and it came from a place beyond their understanding. Hastings stared at Poirot, his mind racing. "You're saying that the Penningtons stole this knowledge? That they've been keeping it hidden for generations?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Precisely. And the vanishing gentleman, as the leader of the society, is the one who has protected that secret. But now, Hastings, it is time for that secret to be revealed. The cloak, the key, the elixir, all of it points to one thing. The Pennington family's legacy must be exposed." For a moment the two men stood in silence, the weight of their discovery settling over them. The room, once filled with mystery, now seemed to hold an air of finality. They had uncovered the hidden truths of the Pennington family, but there was still more to be done. The vanishing gentleman was not yet caught, and the conspiracy that had shaped generations was far from over. Poirot closed the box and turned to face Hastings. "We have come this far, my friend, but we are not finished. The vanishing gentleman is still out there, and he will stop at nothing to protect the secrets of the Pennington family. But we will not let him succeed. We will bring him to justice, and we will reveal the truth to the world." Hastings nodded, his resolve strengthening. "Then let's finish this, Poirot. Let's bring the vanishing gentleman to justice, and put an end to the Pennington family's dark legacy." Poirot gave him a nod of approval, his face resolute. "Yes, Hastings. We will bring this mystery to its conclusion, and we will ensure that the truth is known. But we must be cautious. The vanishing gentleman is a master of deception, and he will not give up easily. We must be prepared for whatever comes next." With a final glance at the stone tablet and the box in his hands, Poirot turned and began to make his way toward the door. Hastings followed closely behind, both of them fully aware that the journey ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. But they were determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. For the first time in their investigation, the path ahead seemed clear. The vanishing gentleman was out there, waiting, but Poirot and Hastings would stop at nothing to uncover the final secrets of the Pennington family. And when they did, the truth would be revealed for all to see. And so, with one final look at the Chamber of Secrets, Poirot and Hastings stepped out into the darkness, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 15. The web unravels. The morning light had barely begun to filter through the blinds when Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings returned to their London office, The case had taken a darker turn, one that neither of them had anticipated. They had uncovered the roots of the Pennington family's dark legacy, but the vanishing gentleman still eluded them, a shadowy figure who seemed to slip through their fingers no matter how tightly they tried to grip him. Poirot, ever the methodical thinker, wasted no time in analysing the latest evidence. He pored over the contents of the wooden box they had discovered in the hidden chamber, carefully separating the ancient parchments and artefacts with a precision that only he could manage. Captain Hastings, standing by his side, watched in awe as his friend worked with such focused determination. "Poirot," Hastings began, breaking the silence that had enveloped them. "Do you think we're getting closer? I mean, after everything we've uncovered, how much more is there left to find?" Poirot did not immediately respond. His eyes were fixed on a small, ornately engraved ring that lay on the desk before him. He turned it in his hand, noting the intricate patterns and symbols that seemed to pulse with a hidden significance. Finally, he looked up at Hastings, his expression a mix of seriousness and resolve. "Closer, mon ami," Poirot echoed, his voice tinged with the quiet intensity that always accompanied his deepest thoughts. "Closer, yes, but the web of deceit that we are entangled in is vast. Each discovery, each piece of evidence leads to more questions, more confusion." Hastings could not help but feel the weight of Poirot's words. The case had grown more complex with every passing day. They had learned of the Pennington family's secret society, its hidden knowledge, and the enigmatic vanishing gentleman who had wielded such power. But they had yet to find the man himself, and the more they dug, the more elusive he became. Poirot stood up from his desk, his eyes narrowing as he gazed out of the window, lost in thought. "This is not just about uncovering a hidden legacy, Hastings," he continued. "This is about understanding the true nature of the vanishing gentleman. Who is he? What drives him? What is his ultimate goal?" Hastings shifted uncomfortably, his thoughts racing. "You think the vanishing gentleman is more than just a figurehead, that he has an agenda of his own?" Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the surface of the desk. "I do, Hastings. The vanishing gentleman may have been the leader of the Pennington family's secret society, but he is no mere puppet. He is a man of incredible ambition, one who has spent his life manipulating the events around him to suit his purposes. We must understand that ambition if we are to catch him." Hastings, still trying to process the magnitude of the case, gave a small nod. "And the ring? What do you think it signifies?" Poirot's eyes flickered to the ring again, and he slowly placed it back into its velvet-lined box. "The ring is not just a symbol of the Pennington family's power. It is a key, Hastings, a key to unlocking the true purpose of their society. If we are to find the vanishing gentleman, we must follow the trail that the Penningtons have left behind. The trail begins with this ring." Captain Hastings's brow furrowed. "But where does it lead?" Poirot's lips curled into a small smile, the kind that suggested he was already several steps ahead of his companion. "The key to the vanishing gentleman's true identity lies, not in what he does, but in who he is. He is a master of disguise, Hastings, a chameleon who has blended into the background for years, unnoticed by those around him. But we must look for the one thing that sets him apart from the others." Hastings nodded, slowly beginning to understand. The one thing that makes him different. Poirot's gaze grew distant. Exactly. The Vanishing Gentleman is not just a name, Hastings. It is an identity, a persona that has been carefully crafted, and I believe that the ring holds the secret to uncovering it. The two men fell into a deep silence, each contemplating the enormity of the mystery they were trying to unravel. The office was still, save for the occasional rustle of paper as Poirot sifted through the documents that had been gathered in their investigation. The weight of the case pressed heavily upon them, and yet there was a sense of urgency in Poirot's movements. He was determined to solve the riddle of the Vanishing Gentleman, and nothing would stop him. Later that afternoon, Poirot and Hastings made their way to the Pennington estate once more. The estate, with its towering gates and grand architecture, had once seemed like a symbol of old-world luxury. Now, however, it felt more like a fortress, its high walls and guarded gates concealing the dark secrets within. Poirot's sharp eyes surveyed the estate with a keen sense of purpose. As they walked toward the entrance, he stopped suddenly, his gaze narrowing at a small, inconspicuous door to the left of the main entrance. "Ah," he murmured, "this door. This is where the answer lies." Hastings followed Poirot's gaze. His curiosity piqued. "What do you mean? We've been here before. Nothing's changed." Poirot raised a finger to his lips, signalling for Hastings to remain silent. With a calmness that belied the tension of the moment, he walked toward the door and pressed his ear against it. There was a faint sound coming from within. Muffled voices, the unmistakable sound of a conversation. Poirot turned to Hastings, his face set in determination. "The Vanishing Gentleman is here, Hastings. I am certain of it." Hastings' heart raced as he followed Poirot to the door. "You're going to confront him now? You're sure it's him?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with purpose. "If we are to uncover the truth, Hastings, we must act now. We can no longer wait for him to make the first move." With a swift motion, Poirot turned the handle of the door, pushing it open with a creak that echoed through the quiet hall. The room beyond was dimly lit, filled with shadows that stretched across the walls like ghosts. The voices grew louder as they stepped inside. And there, at the far end of the room, stood the figure they had been chasing for so long. The Vanishing Gentleman. He was tall, his face obscured by a dark cloak that shimmered in the low light, but there was something about him, something that made him stand apart from the rest. Poirot's eyes never left the figure as he stepped into the room. "So, we meet at last," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. The Vanishing Gentleman did not flinch, nor did he speak. He stood perfectly still, his gaze unwavering. It was as if he were waiting for something, or someone. Poirot took a step forward, his voice steady. "You have evaded us for long enough, monsieur. But now the game is up. You can no longer hide behind your cloak and your illusions." The Vanishing Gentleman remained silent, his face still hidden beneath the hood of his cloak. The room seemed to grow colder, and the air grew thick with anticipation. Poirot continued, his voice gaining strength. "You think you have outsmarted us, that we would never uncover your secrets. But you were wrong. The truth is finally within our grasp." The Vanishing Gentleman's hand moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, reaching towards the folds of his cloak. Poirot's keen eyes never missed a movement. With a sudden motion, the vanishing gentleman flung back his cloak, revealing his face for the first time. And what Poirot saw took him completely by surprise. It was not the face of a man, but the face of a woman, strangely familiar, yet unmistakably different. The vanishing gentleman was none other than Lady Pennington, the matriarch of the family they had been investigating all along. Hastings gasped in shock, his mind racing to make sense of the revelation. Lady Pennington? But how? Why? Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle finally fell into place. The answer was always here, Hastings. The vanishing gentleman was never a man at all. It was Lady Pennington all along. Lady Pennington's lips curled into a sly smile. "You are more perceptive than I gave you credit for, Poirot," she said, her voice cold and measured. "But you are too late. The truth you sought to uncover is already buried." Poirot's gaze was unyielding. "Not buried, madame. It is now in the light." And with that, the final chapter of the mystery was written. The web had unravelled, the vanishing gentleman unmasked, and the secrets of the Pennington family revealed for all to see. The end.